If you're trying to conceive and quietly wondering if life can be whole without a baby, feeling anxious, uncertain, or weary in your faith, you're not alone. Welcome to the Infertility and Trying to Conceive podcast for Christian women. I'm Linda Renee, an Aussie wife, mum, and follower of Jesus. Here I share biblical truth, simple conception tips, offer emotional support, and have honest conversations about what struggling to conceive really looks like as a Christian woman. My prayer is that this podcast lightens your load, keeps you anchored in Christ, and helps you move forward with confidence, peace, and hope. Christ goes before you, and I'm right here helping you look to Him every step of the way. Let's begin. Hey, and thanks for listening today. I'm really grateful that you're here, and I hope this episode encourages you right where you're at. I pray for all my listeners and trust that God is working His will in you, even if this season feels full of barrenness at every turn. And I know this time can ache, but I pray that you will keep clinging to Christ through every up and down. And today I thought I'd talk through some of those little symptoms that you're often on high alert for during the 2-week wait. Are these tweaks and twinges early pregnancy or a sign that your period is about to arrive? This is good to understand because it helps you see why your body feels the way it does right now. Many of your sensations that we associate early pregnancy with are actually caused by progesterone. And in every cycle, whether your body is ovulating naturally or it's being supported with medications for treated cycles, or if you're going through IVF, those progesterone levels, they're boosted in this phase to prepare your uterus or your body to support a potential pregnancy. So for simplicity, I'll describe mostly how the natural cycle works, but there are some differences with IVF or other fertility treatments. But I'll just try and keep things simple so it's easy to follow and understand. So in the space between ovulation and when you either get your period or a positive pregnancy result, you might notice that you feel like, bloated, or you're extra tired, or your sleep is off. And sensations like these happen because progesterone levels rise after ovulation. And this happens in every cycle, whether or not pregnancy actually occurs. And PMS, which stands for premenstrual syndrome, is really just the symptoms in the last few days before your period arrives. Things like mood swings, you might have cravings or headaches, you just feel on edge or irritable. Most of what people notice earlier in this post-ovulation phase, which is also called the luteal phase, or you might just know it as the 2-week wait. But in this phase, it's still progesterone driven, but technically it's not PMS yet. PMS starts when progesterone begins to drop and your body starts to react to that change. And here's where it can get a little bit confusing. Those same progesterone-driven sensations, such as tiredness, bloating, cramping, which aren't yet PMS, they can feel a lot like pregnancy symptoms. Pregnancy keeps progesterone high. So instead of easing off, these sensations stay around. And that's why during the 2-week wait, your body might feel familiar, but also different. And it's why it's easy to overthink everything. Most of the time, your body isn't acting abnormally. You're just noticing that the signs of progesterone are running the show in this phase of your cycle. There are some factors like high stress or polycystic ovary syndrome, also called PCOS, or thyroid issues or inflammation, and various other issues as well. These can influence how much progesterone is produced and whether or not it drops too much before you can do a pregnancy test. But the main driver in this phase generally, it is progesterone. And if all is working well, it generally goes up. The first sign that your cycle is going one way or the other usually isn't clear until either your progesterone drops and your period starts, or your progesterone stays high and you get a positive pregnancy result. And if progesterone drops during early pregnancy, that can often cause miscarriage or early pregnancy loss. So the goal is to keep progesterone high in this stage. After ovulation, progesterone naturally rises pretty much every cycle. Your body doesn't wait to find out whether or not pregnancy will happen before it starts preparing. One of progesterone's jobs is to actually support the uterine lining so that it's ready for when conception does occur. But progesterone doesn't only affect your uterus. It's running the show all over your body. Your chest area, your digestion, your temperature, your sleep, your mood, even how your nervous system reacts to stress. It's all influenced by it. That's why in the days after ovulation, you might notice that you have sore or tender boobs, or, maybe a bit of cramping or extra tiredness, and, even weird dreams or weirder dreams than normal. And yes, all of that can happen in a non-pregnant cycle as well. But often it's because you're paying closer attention to every little tweak or twinge or anything that you have. This can feel important, like as though your body is giving you clues as to what's happening. But these sensations alone can't tell you whether or not you're pregnant. They're just telling you that progesterone is active in your body at the time. Early pregnancy doesn't suddenly just switch everything into a new mode right away. At first, it often looks a lot like your luteal phase. So in a cycle where you haven't conceived, progesterone rises after ovulation and usually falls around about 5 to 7 days later. And that's different for everybody. But that drop is what triggers your period. And if you are pregnant, it doesn't fall. It may, not rise as sharply every day, but it stays up. And that's a big part of why early pregnancy and PMS can feel so similar. Your body is in that same progesterone-driven holding pattern. So when the embryo implants into your uterus lining, it starts releasing the pregnancy hormone HCG, which basically rescues the corpus luteum, that little sac that the egg ovulated from. That's what makes progesterone after ovulation. The HCG says, keep going, don't drop the progesterone. And so your uterine lining stays intact and ready to support pregnancy. In my fertility treatment cycles, my specialist had me inject HCG. And basically, it was tricking my body into thinking that I was actually already pregnant. And so the corpus luteum would continue to produce progesterone. And this is also why that if you're undergoing fertility treatment, your specialist might also prescribe progesterone or even HCG injections to help support your luteal function and to prevent your progesterone levels from dropping too early. The thing that I found slightly frustrating, though, by having the HCG injections was that when it came to time to do a pregnancy blood test, it would often come back positive because of the HCG injections. So I always had to do a second test a couple of days later on. And that second test was the one that mattered. The HCG numbers, if they were rising, it meant that my body had begun to produce the pregnancy hormone itself. And that confirmed pregnancy. But if the numbers were falling, it meant that the injected HCG was leaving my system and the pregnancy just hadn't occurred. So my focus was always on that second test, waiting to see which direction the numbers were going. And in many ways, that experience perfectly captures the emotional reality of the 2-week wait. You're always waiting for clarity, always waiting to see which direction things are heading. And this is why in the early days, the effects of progesterone in your body and early pregnancy, they often feel identical. It's why early pregnancy is sometimes described as PMS that doesn't go away. Symptoms alone can't confirm pregnancy. They only tell you that progesterone is active in your system, which it is after every cycle when you've ovulated. And timing adds another layer of confusion. The luteal phase symptoms, they usually begin a few days after ovulation, and they tend to gradually increase over time. Early pregnancy symptoms, when people notice them, they often show up around the time when a period would normally be due or shortly after it's missed. And those two timelines, they overlap almost perfectly. So there's this window of time where progesterone is high and your body feels different, and yet there's simply not enough information yet to know what's actually happening. Not because anything's wrong, but because your body hasn't separated the two possible paths. And earlier I just mentioned implantation, and I think sometimes, depending on how we look at things, this aspect of our cycle or of early pregnancy, it can increase our stress levels if, you think that it must happen in order for you to be pregnant. Because if conception does happen, just know that the embryo, it's teeny tiny, and your uterine lining, it doesn't actually have pain receptors like your skin or your muscles do. So most of the time, implantation, it doesn't really feel like anything. You might notice a little bit of spotting, and people call this implantation bleeding, or you might not. And the same goes with mild cramping. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And honestly, neither one really tells you for sure if you're pregnant. A lot of the implantation symptoms people talk about are just really your body responding to progesterone after ovulation. But when you're hoping for a baby, every tiny sensation feels so much bigger and every little twinge feels like a sign. And so I understand that too. I understand that oftentimes, you're desperately longing for some sort of confirmation. And it doesn't mean that you're imagining these symptoms. It means that you care. When something matters so much, you do notice any little thing, anything possible that gives you some hope. And we can't just step outside of our bodies. God created us to live inside our bodies and to experience life through them. And this means that we feel every shift, every change, every twinge, especially when our hearts are so invested in something like this. And alongside this, spotting and cramping in general can happen in totally normal cycles too. Spotting could be from hormones, or maybe your cervix is irritated, or maybe just the start of your period is lighter. Cramping can happen if your uterus is reacting to progesterone, or if it's about to shed the uterine lining. And yes, sometimes sadly, it can be due to a miscarriage or pregnancy loss. And I just want to say here that you may have heard people talk about having a chemical pregnancy around this time. Technically, this usually happens a bit later than in this luteal phase that we're sort of looking at right now. And this is because it happens after implantation, when your body starts making HCG enough to turn a test positive. But sometimes the embryo, it stops developing really early on, and often before you can even see it on an ultrasound. For a little while, though, your body, it is responding. Progesterone is high and your symptoms are real, and your hope and excitement, they are real too. But then if the embryo stops developing, your HCG falls, progesterone falls, and bleeding does start. And the term chemical, it doesn't mean that it wasn't real. It just means that it was only detectable hormonally. And if this is your experience, if you've been praying for this baby for so long and you get that positive only to have it fall apart, I just want you to know that your loss is real and it's okay to grieve. It's hard, really, really hard. Nausea is another symptom that often gets mistimed. Nausea isn't caused by implantation. Most of the time, it's by rising HCG and estrogen levels, and that's why it typically shows up after you miss your period, not just a few days after ovulation. The same goes for changes in your smell and your taste. These usually appear later, once hormone levels climb higher. And tiredness or fatigue, they work in a similar way as well. Progesterone already makes people tired in the luteal phase, but early pregnancy fatigue often feels different because it doesn't lift. Instead of easing when your period would normally start, it continues, and sometimes it actually intensifies. But again, the difference becomes apparent only over time, not on a single day. And breast changes, they can overlap too. Progesterone can cause tenderness and swelling every cycle, but early pregnancy sometimes feels like this full or heavy sensation. But again, not always. And some people, they barely even notice any changes in early pregnancy at all. Your digestion as well can change or follow the same pattern. Progesterone slows digestion down, which is why bloating, constipation, and gas are common before you get your period, and they're also common in pregnancy. So the intensity or number of symptoms doesn't reliably tell us what's happening, and that's frustrating at times when you desperately want answers. But another thing that adds a bit more complexity is how your cycle also varies from month to month. Your progesterone levels, they aren't exactly the same. Sometimes you might have stronger luteal effects, so comparing one cycle to another can cause you to wonder what on earth your body is doing. It can feel like there's no rhyme or reason to anything, and I think it can actually create a lot more confusion than clarity. And that's also why fertility specialists, they don't rely on symptoms that you have to make that call. They use hormone levels and timing. So HCG, that's detectable in your blood first, usually somewhere around 8 to 11 days after you've ovulated. And if you're using a home pregnancy test where you do the whole pee on a stick thing, the test may take longer to show a positive result because HCG doesn't show up as quickly in your urine as it does in the blood. And I don't know about you, but often I found myself buying tons of home pregnancy tests because they were pretty cheap and they saved having to go to the doctor all the time. I remember, in the early days of trying, before I saw a fertility specialist, I'd go through like 10 every day just to ensure that I didn't miss something. I'd watch those lines like a hawk and be constantly asking my husband, does it look like a second line is there? I think I see a faint second line. Are you sure you can't see it? I don't know if that rings true for you, but it certainly was my experience, with home pregnancy tests. So, testing before your period has been missed or it's late, it often leads to negative results that don't actually make things any clearer and can actually leave you feeling really disappointed. If you get an early negative test, it doesn't mean that pregnancy hasn't happened. It usually just means that HCG hasn't reached a level where it can be detected yet. But if you continue to have negative tests for a bunch of days after a missed period, then, it generally carries more weight. There's also a common assumption that more symptoms mean a healthier pregnancy and fewer symptoms mean something is wrong. But that's not how early pregnancy works. Whether or not you have certain symptoms, that doesn't indicate if a pregnancy is more likely to continue in the early weeks. Your fertility specialist or doctor will look at what your hormones are doing and what they see on scans, rather than solely on how your body feels. Because we live in our bodies, things feel more real to us. But doctors generally focus on the objective data, which sounds very clinical. But if you're going through any type of fertility treatment right now, you probably have realized that so much of this is just, you can be removed from it. Their job is to look at the data to support the body and in order to have a healthy pregnancy, but it can also feel pretty impersonal, like they're just analyzing everything about you rather than actually seeing you as a person. And I think that's why it's so vital to have that emotional and mental and spiritual support around you, because you're not just data. God is working through these treatments and mechanisms. He's the only one who determines life. He determines it, not the fertility specialists. And even if they pick the eggs or the sperm and bring them together, if as Christians we hold that God is sovereign and that his hand is over all and in all, then even the way conception occurs through fertility treatments even if it seems clinical or manufactured, nothing is outside of God's hands. And I'll probably do an episode on this in the future, but I think there's a really important element to just press into about what it looks like to follow God's ways and to think through how our beliefs align with his word and the focus that he places on giving life and preserving life as well. And so to summarize, when early pregnancy signs, luteal phase symptoms and PMS all feel similar, it's because they're all driven by the same hormone in the same phase of the cycle. The difference isn't what symptom or sensation shows up first, but it's what happens afterwards. Either progesterone drops or it rises, and that takes time. The body hasn't received confirmation of a pregnancy yet, so it can't give confirmation. Once HCG reaches detectable levels, things become clearer. Until then, you kind of sit in a holding pattern. And there are two possible outcomes. I remember Googling everything I could find, reading every forum, trying to figure out how anyone ever knew whether conception actually occurred before testing. And I still remember how shocked I was when my fertility specialist told me that even with all of our technological advancements, they actually have no idea or no way of knowing whether conception has actually occurred. And it's time and God's will that separates them. Before testing. And I still remember how shocked I was when my fertility specialist told me that even with all of our technological advancements, they actually have no way of knowing whether conception has occurred until HCG becomes detectable. And that just amazed me. We live in a world that prides itself on control and knowledge, and yet one of the most sacred and mysterious processes, the beginning of human life, we are completely dependent on what God alone brings about. And that can feel unnerving in some ways, but it also can be deeply grounding. Because even when doctors say your chances of pregnancy are low, even when those statistics feel discouraging, and even when everything looks stacked against you, God is not limited by any of it. Life is in his hands. The 2-week wait is genuinely one of the most frustrating parts of this journey, not because there's something wrong with you, but because the stakes feel so high and the information is so limited at this stage. Every little shift feels like it could mean something or nothing. Your nervous system stays on high alert, and you're constantly just looking for the littlest clue to tell you something. You predict what this or that sensation might mean, and you just generally long for reassurance. And that doesn't mean that you're overthinking or lacking faith. It means that you care, and it means that you're a human being. And the uncertainty is real, and the waiting. And as much as that sucks, it's unavoidable. Knowing these things won't necessarily take away the emotional struggle that you have, but it can create a little space. A reminder that you're not alone in feeling confusion or frustration and stress in this space, especially when a baby is all you think and talk about, when your body changes with each cycle for reasons unknown to you or to your naturopath or to your fertility specialist. But these things are known to God, and He can give you comfort when all of these other things can't. And as I've mentioned, we are each unique human beings created by God. We're not robots. Even though, we probably all wish that we could be textbook perfect, that's not how things generally go in our broken world. And although it is broken, it's still a world where God's purposes are being worked out by Him. Even through the bad, the hard, and the negative things, He works them in ways that we can't always see or feel. But none of the unknowns, the frustrations, or the setbacks reflect your worth or your level of faith or your effort. The waiting and the unknown is simply how God designed this part of the cycle for every single woman. And the way God designs the creation of another human being requires waiting. There's no shortcut around it. And this isn't because the process is poorly designed, but because early development is gradual and it's quiet. The body moves in stages. Progesterone prepares the body, and HSG confirms pregnancy, and estrogen shifts, and then structural changes follow. None of that happens instantly, and none of it happens on any sort of precise schedule that removes uncertainty. And although it's hard, and I really mean that, it is hard, none of this, though, is outside God's hands. He made you, and He holds every hope, every tear, and every prayer, and every result, even the ones that are painful and confusing and don't make sense to us yet. Before you go, thank you so much for listening. I pray today's episode has brought you fresh hope for whatever comes next. If someone comes to mind today who could truly use support in this space, please share this episode or the podcast with them. It might be exactly what they need. And if you could take 30 seconds to give me a star rating or leave 1 or 2 sentences about what this podcast has meant to you on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I'd be ever so grateful. Your feedback not only helps others find the podcast, but it truly makes my day. And words of affirmation are my love language. And if you're not sure how to do that, I'll pop the links in the show notes below. Lastly, although I do have a nursing degree, everything shared in this podcast is for inspiration and education only. Please don't use it as a replacement for advice from your personal, medical, or mental health professional. There's absolutely no shame in getting additional support when you need it, but always consult your expert team before making any changes to your fertility journey. That's all from me today. Take care, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.